So there's a number of best practices around governance. Again, this is all detailed quite nicely in the Cloud Adoption Framework category on Microsoft's website. So naming convention is one of the key things to look at. Again, recommended naming conventions by Microsoft. When you create resources in Azure, as I'm sure you're aware, you quickly build up a number of different objects or resource types within your Azure subscriptions. So even just deploying a VM will have a VM object, a disk object, a network card object, IP object. So it's important to have a consistent naming convention across your resources. And this helps sort of ongoing management. It's easy to identify which resources are associated with certain things. So I'd recommend planning that before you start deploying anything if possible. And then looking at things like management groups, subscriptions and resource groups. So these can be used as boundaries, and they could be security boundaries that you apply RBAC permissions to, or it could be boundaries to where you apply policies to. So typically, if you were deploying a new environment, you would maybe go for a separate subscription for production resources, and then another one for pre-production or dev test. And that allows you to keep these environments segregated and give the right people the right access, to the resources that they're working with. Tagging of resources is another useful thing to do. Again, it just helps sort of management and tracking of your environment and supporting it going forward a lot easier. So that could be something like, putting an owner tag on there so that you know who owns that resource if you've got queries about it, or the application that resource is associated with, or whether the environment's production or dev test. Lots of other things you can do as well with tags that feed in to the automation piece. We regularly use tags combined with Azure Update Management to assign virtual machines to particular sort of patching groups. So lots of uses for that, and something that should be looked at. Also, consider using infrastructure as code for your deployments. So that could be ARM templates or something like Terraform. It just allows you to have that consistency across environments. Scenarios where it's particularly useful is if you've got multiple application environments that are basically the same. You might have a production, a pre-production, a dev test, and they're all very similar. So if you define that in infrastructure as code, then you can just feed in the different parameters when you deploy it between the different environments, and you've got that consistency. There's no sort of margin for human error. You know that those environments are going to be essentially identical, apart from maybe names and specifications of web apps or servers, etc. And also there's a feature called Azure Locks, which allows you to lock resources at a subscription or resource group level, and this means that you can't accidentally delete resources. You'd have to remove the lock first and then delete the resource, so it just saves sort of accidental deletion of resources within your environment. So just another layer of protection.